Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our live session this morning here at Transcend. We are doing a special legislative live stream this morning to help get you up to speed of the latest raft of privacy and AI bills that have passed through on the last day of the legislature in California. So we're going to cover a series of bills today covering areas from opt-outs for definitions of AI, artificial intelligence for the purposes of regulation, and a number of different areas. So we'll go through all of those in this 30-minute session. But to start, as people get joined and people sign on to the live stream, we are streaming on LinkedIn, we might do some quick intros. So Dave, I might throw to you first, introduce yourself, and then Ron.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Glad to be here. My name is Dave Barmore. I'm one of the co-founders of Runway Strategies, a consultancy that's proud to be working with Transcend and a number of other clients, helping them navigate all of the state and federal developments around data privacy and AI. Ron, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dave. Hey, everyone. Ron DeJesus here, Transcend's Field Chief Privacy Officer. And prior to that, I was Chief Privacy Officer at Grindr and led privacy efforts at Tinder, Match Group, Coach. So lots of in-house operational experience, and I'm excited to have this chat with Dave and Andrew on how we as privacy operational professionals are going to be dealing with all these new requirements, both from an AI and kind of general privacy perspective. So thanks for joining.
Awesome. Thank you both. And for those that don't know me, I'm Andrew. I'm on the team here at Transcend. I'm head of corporate communications. And my job today is to help moderate this conversation so you can get quickly up to speed of what's moving and what's potentially ahead in California. So just to set some context at the start, Saturday, while we were all probably relaxing, enjoying our Labor Day weekend, or the start of our Labor Day weekend, it was the last day for both houses in the California Legislature to pass bills as their session wraps ahead of November. So as I mentioned before, we saw a number of bills sent to Governor Newsom's desk covering a few different areas: consumer data, regulating artificial intelligence, and as Dave will cover off at the end, the clock now starts on these bills either coming into law and being signed into law or being vetoed. So we'll touch on a number of those today. We'll explain what's in each of those bills and what you should be watching for. And we'll also just touch on some of the implications and the requirements and trends that are appearing as we look at the state of US comprehensive privacy bills. So Dave, with that kind of setup, I might hand it off to you and just tell us when you need the slide change, but we'll pass off to you to kind of walk us through each of these bills and what's contained within each.
Sounds great. Again, thanks, Andrew. As you just mentioned, it was a very action-packed weekend in Sacramento as the legislature worked until the wee hours of the night, considering and enacting all of the bills that were passed out of both the state assembly and the state senate. So they gavelled out finally at midnight on Saturday night. And now, as Andrew mentioned, the bills that were passed are now sitting on Governor Newsom's desk, and he has until the end of this month, September 30th, to either sign or veto those measures. So wanted to kind of unpack of the 9 bills that did make it past the finish line pertaining to data privacy and AI. Wanted to kind of walk you all through what those bills were and how they could impact your business and how the privacy communities reacted to these different initiatives that have been moving down the line in Sacramento. So we'll go ahead and we'll start with 4 privacy-focused bills. And the first one being this AB 3048. So this bill was introduced by Representative Josh Lowenthal. He's a representative from the Long Beach area in Los Angeles. Before his time in politics, I think it's interesting, he was actually in the tech and telecom space. He was an entrepreneur and owned multiple businesses in that space. So he has a tech background, which I think is why we will see his name on many of the privacy and tech focused bills that we'll talk about today. But this particular bill is interesting in that it touches on a subject that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, UMs, or the universal opt-out mechanisms. As I'm sure you all know, are tools that allow consumers to automatically opt out of the sale or sharing of their personal information with different businesses. So California today already requires that a business has to honor when a consumer makes a request to opt out of having their information be sold or shared. But I think what's unique about this particular bill is that it goes beyond that, and it says that browsers have to incorporate this universal opt-out mechanism as part of their business. So it goes far and beyond what already a dozen states have with just the individual requirements for businesses. And this is specifically targeting, if you think about it, the Google Chromes, the Safaris, and the Android and iOS mobile platforms. So I think this will be a first in the nation, and I think we'll likely see other states replicate this and put pressure on the browsers to adopt this opt-out preference signal. So I think it's interesting, and I'd love to get Ron's thoughts on this, as I know that we've talked about this universal opt-out mechanism in some of the other states that have passed it as well.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, it's Ron, to you, like California is often the standard bearer when it comes to kind of setting privacy legislation in the US now. This was already in place in terms of companies having to honor it, but this seems to be now, this is just standard part and parcel of the next wave of privacy regs.
Yeah, and I would say, practically speaking, obviously, if you're not a company that's developing a browser, right, you're probably not that impacted by this particular requirement. Obviously, post Sephora, we've all likely done our due diligence and have made sure that we are responding to UMs, particularly the GPC or the Global Privacy Control, for example. So again, I think from an operational perspective, really what Privacy Pros should be looking at is ensuring that if they're engaged, or if they've engaged a consent management platform, that it is able to respond to the /the GPC in an appropriate way. One of the things that obviously we'll need to kind of wait and see is how this is going to impact the mobile environment, because currently mobile operating systems haven't really contemplated the response to an I know that there's some native capabilities, but that Apple and Android are working on. But from a mobile environment, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But again, from a more operational, if you're not a browser developer, you likely will already have had done something to address the fallout of Sephora and what happened there. So yeah, again, something that is going to be great to just kind of require from a browser perspective, but again, for us operational folks, we're already doing the work. So
more than happy to keep using my favorite acronym in privacy, which is absolutely brilliant.
Although I think there's an oops as well, right? If we take whether we like the oops or the ums.
More of those fun ones versus that all of them are slightly similar versus one letter. Dave, should we move on to the next one?
Yeah, let's do it. So this next one was an interesting one on mergers and acquisitions. So this one was introduced by Democratic member Avelino Valencia. He's from the Anaheim area. What this bill does in particular is that it amends the existing California privacy law to state that when a business goes through some kind of transfer of their information, whether it's through a merger or an acquisition, bankruptcy, or any other kind of business transaction, the entity that takes control of that business needs to comply with all of the consumer's opt-out requests as part of that business transaction. So interesting bill, kind of specifically targeting those entities that are going through those types of businesses transactions. But something to keep in mind if you're a part of a company that's looking to go through that M&A process, when this gets signed into law, as I don't foresee there being any risk that Newsom would veto this. I think you'll likely need to honor those opt-out requests as part of that. So interesting bill there.
Yeah, and this is one of those common sense ones. Like, why wouldn't you continue to respect the user's choice post a sale, a merger, or acquisition? In my experience, I have had marketing teams ask me if they can reset their choices after we've acquired something. So it's now good to be able to point to something and say yes. Obviously, because given your risk profile or your risk appetite, you might go a certain way. But now, at least from a California perspective, I can tell my marketing teams that yes, just because we're buying this specific company doesn't mean we have free for all when it comes to their marketing choices. So yeah, just one of those common sense ones that I think is just great for operational professionals.
Yeah, gives more clarity and removes the gray area. That's right. Awesome.
This next one was a common trend that we've seen not only in California, but I would say across all states. Looking back this 2024 legislative session, there's been a real focus on children's privacy, online social media, and the impacts it's having on our youth and teenagers. So with this particular bill, AB 1949, again, we saw Josh Lowenthal and Representative Buffy Wicks, who's from the Bay Area, introduce this measure. And what this particular bill does is that it states that a business cannot collect, sell, or share any personal information of a child from the ages of 13 to 17 without that child's consent. Or if the child's below the age of 13, they have to receive that consent from the parent or the guardian of the child. I think what was interesting is this: you saw industry push back very hard on this part of the bill that focuses on age verification. For those of you that were following the Age Appropriate Design Code, which was another bill that was passed years ago in the California Legislature, looking to target certain social media platforms and how they are designing their features for children users, that is currently going through the court system. And the big controversial issue there is, again, how companies can legally verify the age of those users. And so you're seeing that play out with the debate on this particular bill. And a lot of the amendments that were offered reflect some of the latest developments in terms of the legal case playing out on that age appropriate design code. So the final bill talks about how the business must have actual knowledge or willfully disregard that the consumer's age, and that equates to a violation of this act. So again, this is something that we've seen in many other states, this focus on children's privacy. And I think we'll continue to see a focus on this looking into 2025 as well.
Is this?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Andrew.
I was just going to say, Dave, I don't mean to get crystal ball out on you, but I was going to say, like, it feels like, if anything, children's privacy is perhaps the area that we might see federal movement on before we even get to a US kind of all-encompassing privacy bill. There seems to be a lot of interest there right now with some of the bills being handed back and forth.
That's right, Andrew. And to further kind of clarify that, Congress is considering a number of bills that would update the federal children's privacy law, COPPA. And so there have been a number of proposals that have been out there. in the Senate, there was a major development in passing kind of a Kids Online Safety Act, KOSA. We'll see if that is able to get past the House. I think we're unfortunately seeing some politics play out, and whether or not that's able to get past the finish line before the election. But you're right, Andrew, that was a big issue that did make it past the Senate here in DC. I think until that bill is passed, you'll see a lot of states, California included, saying that they need to pick up the mantle and address this issue. And that's exactly, I think, what was done here with this particular children's privacy bill.
Yeah. Ron, any insights you'd add?
No, yeah, I completely agree. When we have, issues that relate to children, and rightfully so, they tend to get a lot of momentum. And as David mentioned, we're seeing that with COSPA. I think just operationally speaking, when you take a look at these requirements, again, something that shouldn't be novel to us when or if we are directing our services to children, we should obviously have been doing things as a result of the federal law, COPPA, but it's probably just pause to take a look at your current age gating mechanisms and, assess the current sufficiency of those mechanisms, because, from a data use perspective, you're going to want to obviously only collect, use, and process personal information of minors or of that age range if you have that verifiable consent. Probably also pause to look at your data inventories to see, what data that you might have on minors, and now do you have to go and get consent because you might have not done that exercise. So I think, again, from an operational perspective, nothing new, just again, reassessing the current controls in place.
This one was a fun one. So for those of you that were following the news of Elon Musk's Neuralink, saying that, they've made waves in successfully implanting the first brain to computer device. I have a lot of friends that have those, whether wearable devices that will track your sleep patterns. And so I think with more and more of those companies coming to market, we're seeing a need from the policy and regulatory space to regulate how that data is treated. So I think with this particular bill, Senate Bill 1223, it is amending the existing privacy law to include a consumer's neural data, and it defines neural data to capture that, to make sure that that data can't be abused or misused by those particular companies. Interestingly, another state this session, Colorado, passed a very similar bill. We're continuing to see Colorado be at the forefront in addition to California. We'll talk about AI here in a minute, but both Colorado and California have been on the front lines and on the artificial intelligence issue as well. But so this one was interesting. I think there were some advocacy groups out there pushing for the passage of this bill on the neural information. And again, I don't see there being any risk of a veto. And so it will be able to add neural data to the list of categories that the consumer privacy law contemplates.
Yeah.
You all have those wearable devices. I have a friend who swears by, I forget the ring that he wears, but
the Aura ring, whatever it is, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's so American to have something that is specific to a specific type of data and make sure that you have a requirement to include it in the definition of sensitive personal information, because you would assume to some degree that neural data could be considered health data, which is already part of that definition. But it's interesting to see that approach, and obviously, given to your point, Dave, like these rings or these monitors, their ability to collect just reams and reams of personal information, it makes sense. And yeah, it's good to see California. I wonder if California did this as a result of Colorado calling it out. But I think we'll see more of this as new types of data kind of pop up that could be susceptible to further, just concern by regulators. So.
Well, what a good segue from the human brain and neural data to the artificial brain. And Dave, there were a number of bills signed on this kind of like sprint to Saturday at midnight around AI. So would love to get a bit of a walkthrough of kind of what you saw coming out here and kind of what's being set in California.
Yeah, well, I think the first one we'll touch on was one that garnered a ridiculous amount of media attention. I don't think you could Google California AI without seeing a headline on this particular bill, the Safe and Secure Innovation for Frontier AI Act, Senate Bill 1047. So I mentioned Colorado previously. So just earlier this year, Colorado passed what was a landmark bill looking to put in place certain standards for how AI models could operate, and I think take a more consumer approach in terms of transparency and just putting in place some safeguards there. This particular California bill, I think, was much more controversial in that the bill sponsor, Senator Scott Wiener, who represents the San Francisco area, went through a very long process that included many different committee hearings in which amendments were made and negotiated with industry. As you can imagine, his district includes many of the big behemoth companies that he's looking to regulate with this bill. I'm thinking, the Anthropics, the OpenAIs. And so we saw a lot of back and forth just in terms of how this bill would, in many opinions, stifle innovation, and what's that common ground they could find that ensures that there are safeguards in place, where I think this bill is targeting what many would call like the doomsday scenario, and making sure that for those large AI models that there are those safeguards in place. The companies are required to do different kind of risk assessments and testing to ensure that those catastrophic events cannot play out. So that's what you saw with this particular bill. Just diving into this a little bit deeper. So specifically what this would do is require that certain types of AI models, and again, the threshold of which companies would be targeted was a subject of debate, and they increased those thresholds to make sure that it wasn't going to unfairly target smaller, startups looking to get into the space. So the threshold that was agreed on was that $100 million requirement, and there's a certain computational threshold as well to make sure that it's only targeting the largest kind of frontier models there. So for those companies that are targeted, what it would be required is that they are first and foremost able to quickly and fully shut the model down, that they're able to protect against any kind of unsafe post-training modifications, or just, again, doing those risk assessments to evaluate whether or not there's a risk of the model causing any kind of critical harm. So as I mentioned, industry fought back hard on this. They enlisted the help of many federal policymakers to oppose this. I found one of the developments very interesting, in which former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi actually came out and opposed the bill. There's some really great political reporting on why she ended up ultimately opposing the bill, and whether there was some political motivations behind that versus more policy-based ones. But so that I found was really fascinating and interesting that Pelosi got involved. But I think at the end, what you saw was a compromise, in that the representative agreed to many amendments that one, it eliminated a state agency that the bill initially was looking to create, which would have regulated these AI systems. That's no longer a part of the bill that passed. It also reduced the penalties for the companies if they were found in violation of the bill, and it also narrowed some of the testing requirements. So as part of that groundswell of opposition you saw from industry, those were kind of the outcomes of some of their involvement there. So
did those amendments, I mean, this is the one that probably, I guess, is the most likely to face veto, if any, perhaps. Is there any sense of like how Newsom might move on this one?
It's interesting. No one knows. I agree with you, Andrew. I think of all the bills that we discussed today, this is the one that I think is most likely to receive a veto. He was quoted earlier this summer about just the risk that the state runs in over-regulating artificial intelligence, and some people have taken that to read between the lines that he's likely to veto. But I think we'll wait and see. There's no real indication as to where he'll fall on this particular one.
Okay.
So that is one that again garnered a bunch of headlines. These other bills are equally as important, but I think lesser known. This particular one, AB 2013. So what this one does is it ensures that the data that is used to train different artificial intelligence models, the companies have to be transparent in terms of disclosing what types of data are being used in the training of these different models. So the scope of this applies to developers of generative AI systems, and the types of documentation that must be used would contain the following. So it includes sources or owners of the data sets used to develop, train, or modify the generative AI system. It would also require that there's a description of how these data sets further the intended purpose of the system or service. Again, a description of the types of data points that are used. So it's really trying to get at, again, how companies are using different data sets to train AI models and making sure that they're being transparent to the general public on that.
Yeah, with that one, I would just quickly say from a operational perspective, again, somewhat of a common sense thing. Presumably, if you are, a good steward of privacy and taking those steps to be more consumer protective and friendly, you're likely going to be covering that in your privacy policy anyway. I know a number of companies already going, the extra mile to describe the AI technologies that they have and what data they're using to train those models. So again, great that we have that. That's going to be enshrined in law, but again, if you're a mature company with a mature privacy program, you're likely already doing that as a result of like your baseline requirements. So
yeah. I'll do a quick time check. We've got a couple of minutes before we're already at 10 a.m. Pacific. So Dave, maybe you can give us a speed round through the remainder. I think the next one we had was just adding some definition to the term of artificial intelligence in this one.
This one, yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just updating the state definition of AI and making sure it's consistent in how it's applied across the industry. So I go ahead and if you want to advance to the next slide. This one is particularly interesting in that it is trying to target how generative AI systems are, the provenance, how they're disclosing the information to consumers. And so let me pull up my, this was introduced by Senator Josh Becker. And again, for systems that have over 1 million monthly active users, they'd be required to create an AI detection tool. So again, allowing consumers the ability to detect what's real, what's fake, maybe generated via AI. And I think really interesting in that it's giving the power to consumers to have that tool to, again, understand what might have been generated using AI.
Let me just check if we've got them all. I think there's one more that we don't have a slide for, but Dave, maybe you can touch on that one really quickly. And I think that is the AB 1008, which is
1008. Yes, that was one that passed alongside the neural data bill. This one simply updates the definition of existing in the existing California privacy law, the definition of personal information. So it essentially says that personal information can exist in artificial intelligence systems that are capable of outputting personal information. So the bill sponsor was very clear that she wanted to ensure that generative AI, so the chat GPTs, all the data that's put out through those types of AI models, that includes personal information as part of that new updated definition. So it's truly the nexus of privacy law and artificial intelligence. So I thought that was an interesting one to include, and we'll likely see other states emulate that as well.
And that's interesting because it just super quickly that diverges from the European perspective, especially if you've seen the discussion paper coming out of the Hamburg DPA, where they've taken a kind of a draft stance on the fact that they don't believe AI systems contain personal information. So that's interesting that we've taken that approach.
I saw that in the California regulators, the California Privacy Protection Agency actually took the stance that they're going to be at odds with the Hamburg regulators on this issue. And so you'll see a little bit of divergence from, like you mentioned, across the pond. So
yay for us trying to navigate through that.
So as we alluded to at the start, clock starts now, essentially, Dave. So now it's on Governor Newsom first a month to sign what he decides he wants to sign into law.
So yeah, stay tuned. We'll likely see, if he provides any kind of signals of what he's likely to sign or veto. He has until that September 30th deadline. So we'll keep you all updated of what makes it into law with his signature. And Andrew, as you mentioned too, there is a November deadline. If the legislature looks to come back and for a special session, which it looks like there might be some special session convened on gasoline prices. And so there's always a chance that issues get tacked on to a special session. So if that does get called and there are issues that are debated on data privacy and AI, we'll be sure to let you all know as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll keep close watch on this. If you're following Transcend on LinkedIn or you're signed up to Snippets or you're part of our Privacy Pulse community, we are posting regularly on these things with Dave's team's assistance. So we'll probably do another one of these as we get to the other side of September and look at how this all turned out. I know we're a little bit over, but Ron, maybe your 20-second kind of takeaway from all of this, some gray area removed perhaps, but still the patchwork exists.
Patchwork still exists, and par for the course in terms of being a operational privacy compliance professional. We take these things as they come to us and work with our teams internally to make sure that they are aware of these requirements coming down the pipe. But again, if you live in the US and you're a privacy pro here in the US, it's kind of expected. So nothing new.
Nothing new. Awesome. Well, we'll wrap it there. But Dave and Ron, thank you both so much for making time this morning. As I said, for those that are joining us on the stream, we will post a recording of this either later today or tomorrow, and we will keep you posted as these bills move across the governor's desk. But thanks everyone for joining today. And thank you both, Ron and Dave, for joining the conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks so